afternoon to everyone. I'm Lorenzo Delbene. I was the guy of last year, as many of you, that presented the anchors calculations and the best anchor design for equalizing any anchor. And this year we will talk also with Joshua about two different topics, two different but really close topics that are stretch curves and on my part on slackline damping. And I will start by saying what is slackline damping and what is these properties that we ignore till this point. Which are the webbing properties of any slackline, the main webbing properties, because there are many. And then I will finish with an example that is bouncing on a high line. So for starting, what is slackline damping? The damping, as you can find, for example, on Wikipedia, it cites that in physical systems, damping is produced by processes that dissipate the energy stored in the simulation. For example, we can think of a slackline or any rope, for example, a climbing rope, as a spring. And this spring, you can see on the left, is a spring that has no damping at all. In fact, you can see a spring with a mass attached that will oscillate forever. In fact, this is an ideal case. Naturally, there's no such thing in reality, where there are no internal frictions, so the spring will last forever. But we know that in the reality, we have the spring on the right, because due to internal friction damping, this parameter that we don't talk about so much, of the material, at a certain point, the mass attached to the spring will stop. So naturally, all that I said was without these little gifs that you can see here. So the one that I was talking about on the left is the ideal cases. The one on the right is the real cases. You can think about the one on the right when you have a high line fixed or a slack in the park, and you perturb it, for example, just shaking it, and you observe that after a certain time, depends on the tension, depends on the elasticity of the webbing, depends on its mass, on many parameters. Damping is one of them. It will stop. So you can, without these little gifs that you can see here. So the one that I was talking about on the left is the ideal cases. The one on the right is the real cases. You can think about the one on the right when you have a high line fixed or a slack in the park, and you perturb it, for example, just shaking it, and you observe that after a certain time, depends on the tension, depends on the elasticity of the webbing, depends on its mass, on many parameters. Damping is one of them. It will stop. So you can think about damping a little bit. For example, the closest thing to think about it is with fluids. For example, you have water and you have honey. Dipping something in water is extremely easy, while dipping something in honey, you have to continuously put a force into it to move around. So damping is something like that. So there are slackline that while they move, maybe they are moving at constant speed, not accelerating. They just move, but they make more effort with respect to others. So the webbing properties that I want to talk about are mainly three properties that are the mass of the webbing, the elasticity, and the last one is the damping. The first two, we know it about, we know them because every time we go on our slackline page, we always search for these two. A new slacklines come on the market, we ask, yeah, is what kind is nylon, polyester, is blah, blah, blah. But what is his mass per unit meter? What is is stretch curve. Normally say yes, but at 5 kilonewton, how much stretch? At 10 kilonewton, how much? So mass is the easiest one to measure because we only need a scale. For example, we have 100 meters of webbing, we have a scale, and we know the total weight, and we divide for the meters, and we obtain the gram per meters. Really easy. And through this information, anyone says, okay, it's a heavier slackline, it's harder, it's a lighter slackline, and blah blah blah. Elasticity is the one that Joshua will talk about in a really detailed manner, because up to now we know like the stretch curve, but there are different things that we must add to this stretch curve. And thanks to the stretch curve, till now we knew, okay, at 5 kilonewtons, how much is the stretch? At 10 kilonewtons, how much is the stretch? And it's never a linear relation. It's not like a metallic spring, for example, that it's more or less constant. The last parameter is damping that I was talking about before. And the damping mass, as I said, is the easiest parameter to measure. Elasticity, you need a proper machine, but it can be done. Damping, also in the engineering world, is extremely difficult to achieve. There are techniques, absolutely, but they are really, they depend a lot on disturbance and how you perform the test. So it's difficult to achieve, but it can be done naturally. And damping, as I said before, it accounts for the internal frictions of the structure of the webbing. So these three parameters that are key components of anything that moves in our world. Anything that moves in our world, the main parameter are this: it's mass, it's elasticity, because everything in our world is not stiff. It's not 100% stiffness. It can have some kind of elasticity. And there's also the damping, because we have friction in our world. And we know that mass is always linked to the acceleration. So imagine someone going on a line. We know that when there's a heavier slack line, assume that we will start it to move, that it's more difficult, but when it starts to move, it's always so more difficult to stop it, because it has more mass, so more inertia, and it is linked to acceleration. If you can walk without moving the slack line at all, when it's really heavy, you just stay focused, you just stay still, because mass doesn't enter into the equation of your walking. But if you start to make a lot of movement, naturally it will be a little of a mess. Elasticity, instead, is not linked to the movement of the slack line. It is in some kind of way, but in the first approximation, elasticity is simply linked to the deformation. In fact, we use the stretch curve, for example, when rigging in the park, really long lines, or to establish, for example, highline taping and highline stitching to know when to do it, where to do it. And we use the elasticity graph, because they depend only on a static world. And then there's damping, that is the last one, that is linked to the deformation velocity. So imagine a slackline that is continuously stretched, and at 10 kilonewtons and then to 5 kilonewtons. For example, a machine that continues to stretch the slackline from 10 kilonewtons to 5. There's damping in that effect, because the total force that you read in the tension is different from the static one, because there's also the damping side. Imagine a slackline really damped, let's say, with a lot of friction inside. It's like to have honey on a table and try to stretch it and compress it continuously. It's way more difficult to stretch and compress honey with respect to water. So damping, it's important also in the slackline world. And for continuing, and for the last thing, and I will give the continuation of the presentation to Joshua. An example, for example, is bouncing. Someone bouncing on a line. So when someone bounces on the line, we saw that the three parameters that are really important are three. So the mass of the slackline, its elasticity, and its damping. Up to now, if we consider only mass and elasticity, as we know for the characteristic of the slackline when we buy them on their websites, we find that maybe two slacklines have the same or almost the same mass and almost the same elasticity, almost the same stretch curve, but they behave really different when we start to do some tricks on them. So we are like, why? Why is that? They have the same characteristic, almost the same. Well, maybe if we accounted also for damping, that will help, because, for example, two material can have exactly the same mass and exactly the same elasticity, but they can behave differently because one acts like honey and one acts like water. So, for example, if we have one slack that is a lot of friction inside, we will need a higher force. So we will have to push harder to obtain the same elasticity, the same bounces, the same degree of bounce. Not because it's stiffer, because the elasticity is the same, but because we have to make more force to move to make it stretch. So the degree of elasticity is the same. In fact, maybe from the external point of view, you are doing the exact same huge bounces, but the force that you have to put in the line is much higher. In fact, we know that when a slackline has a higher mass, for example, it's more difficult to make it move at the beginning, but then when you reach a point where there's no acceleration, when you don't have to accelerate it anymore, that it's almost stable because it's heavier, but then it will propagate further. For example, if you stop to bounce, it's more difficult to stop. When it's a lot elastic, for example, a ping tube line, and I think that ping tube line has also really little damping. You get huge bounces and you don't use so much forces. But there are slackline, for example, that have that are have the same weight, almost the same weight of it, and almost the same elasticity, but they are more difficult to bounce. So why is that? It's probably because they are damping, because the damping of the material and the way they were soon made this slackline with a higher damping. And so in the bouncing, naturally, it's more difficult when the line is stiffer, when the line is heavier, and also when there's higher damping. This was only a presentation, as you saw, with no practical information, let's say, with no real test, anything, because it's a new topic also, and it's only to give you an idea of this third parameter that could help in understanding the choice of slacklines and how they behave. Also, for example, the right one to use as a backup, or the right one to use as a bounce line, etc., etc. Now I will give back the presentation to Joshua, that have, I think, really interesting topic to talk about.
Okay, thanks Lorenzo for this presentation, for the introduction of dampening and so on. That's interesting topic, which I think is like not at all researched yet in slacklining. What effect does it have? What do we actually want? Do we want to have more dampening or less dampening? Because potentially dampening is a quite good thing to just get like the line more stable. That if you make a mistake and if there's a movement going on in the line, that it's actually being absorbed. On the other hand, for trick bouncing, most likely you don't want to have too much dampening to really have the bounce going on effortlessly. So that's definitely really interesting. I might have a potential proposal how to measure it. Let's see if I can start my presentation. Let's see, is this... God. 1 second. No, I think okay. So I don't have much experience with presenting anything. Let's see if I manage now. I cannot share this. Ah, yeah, okay. And can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so like first topic I want to talk a bit is the viscoelastic effect of webbings, or of any plastic material anyway. And I got like this graph like this morning from Leupolz from Delbene. He shared this in a Facebook chat, and it really shows in a nice way what is happening with webbing. Because now we often understand like webbing as a pretty perfect spring. So you stretch it out and it's going, it stays at this tension and it goes back to zero again if you detension it. But in reality, it's not acting as a perfect spring. As everyone knows, once you tension a slackline after the first session, if it's nylon, you need to retension again. And that's what you can see here. I think that's done with, I assume it's a static rope, but not totally sure. I would assume it's a 11 millimeter static. And here you can see it clearly. So first he tensioned the rope to 2.7 kilonewton, and then he just waited for almost 2 minutes. And in these 2 minutes, it dropped down to 1.96 kilonewton. So it almost lost 0.8 kilonewton during this time. And if you follow the graph, it's potentially even dropped even further if you would wait for another 10 minutes. That's also our experience from highlining. You tension the line, and then you need to retension after the first session again, and then often even like 2-3 more times until it's stabilizing itself. And this is this effect that the webbing is stretching out over time more and more the longer you wait, until it's settling down at one point. And then the really interesting thing is also like what then a lot of people don't know, in the opposite way you have the same effect. So if you then after 2.5 minutes, he detensioned the line down to 1.24 kilonewton and waited again like another minute or a bit more than a minute. And then actually the tension after dropping first was increasing again to 1.5 kilonewton. So you have like the opposite effect actually. So if you had like a high tension line and you release it, then it will tighten up afterwards again. And this is like happening multiple times and can have like quite a big impact. So if you go down to 0.7 kilonewton, it drops up back to 1 kilonewton. And I think there's like a few interesting outtakes of this while rigging. First of all, I mean, most of people know already, if you want to get to a certain tension, you first need to over-tension a bit until the tension is dropping down again. So you can calculate with this. But I also had sometimes the experience, if you have like a difficult D-rig and you know your soft release is not really long, it's sometimes worth to be really fast. So you detension and you try immediately to open up the web lock or to get more, to do like whatever you need to do. Because if you wait a little bit longer, then the tension will increase on the webbing again. So potentially maybe you're able with the soft release to drop down until 30 kilograms of tension on the line, which you can easily undo. But if you wait like 10 more minutes, the tension will increase up to 60, 70 kilograms where you're not able to undo the web lock anymore or whatever, or cannot hold it with your hand. So that's some interesting outputs already out of this graph, which can be useful while tensioning and detensioning. And that's also like and this is like also linked to the dampening effect. That's exactly where you lose energy basically. So you tension it up and you lose then some stretch again, which when you release, you don't get this energy back anymore. So there is also some dampening happening, and the longer you wait, the slower you stretch something out, the more losses you have over time. And then the next graph, which I want to show, is then you have here now force and extension of each other. That is like a hysteresis. loop, which I show you here. And this is basically what happens while tensioning and untensioning, detensioning. So here loading and unloading. So first you load your webbing up and it's taking the blue path. And you basically, the area below this blue graph is like the energy you put into your system. That's like force times extension. That's like the main ingredients for like how much energy you store in your system. And the whole area below there is like basically the energy you put in it. While detensioning it, you don't follow exactly the same path. Instead, you follow like the red path, which means the tension is dropping in the beginning quite a lot, and then it's going back to the initial point again. And then the area which you regain at energy is like below this red path. And everything between the blue and the red line is like losses in energy. So that's basically where the dampening is happening. So that's like comparing to one bounce, you need to put a certain amount of energy in to press the line down while bouncing. But what the line is giving you back to push you up is then less. And that's like the reason what Lorenzo said, like in reality, nothing is perfect. So you need to constantly put energy into the system to keep the same bounce. If you stop pushing the legs in to the line, it will slowly fade out the bounce. And that's what you can see here. And let me just check the next graph. And this is like pretty interesting for us. Like this curve can change depending on the speed, how fast you're loading it. So if you're loading it relatively slow, the whole graph will like stretch out to the right side a bit. So if you're going like to the same force and holding it for longer, it will just like stretch out more over time. And then detensioning, you have the same effect. It's like just longer. If you're doing it faster, if you're loading it faster, this curve is getting like a bit thinner. The two lines will most likely go closer to each other, and it's everything like a little bit more steep. And that means like you have like more energy in there and less stretch. One thing which I need to say, because from the next graph you see like how do we measure at the moment stretch charts of webbings. So I have like here one example webbing, and here you can see how we measure it at the moment. The big difference is we have here on the left side the stretch, so the elongation, in this case stretch in percent, and then bottom the tension. In the other graph you see it's like just flipped the other way around. In scientific work it's always normally like the force on the y-axis and on the upper axis and the extension on the lower axis. Somehow in slacklining we swap the axis. I don't know exactly who started this. It can be sometimes a bit confusing, just be aware of it. Overall, both of it works. You just need to know if you have like this stretch over tension, the steeper the curve is, the more stretchy it is. And in the other way around, it's like the flatter the curve is, the more stretchy it is. It's a bit confusing, but yeah, in the end, we need to live with this now. But here, this is like one curve which is being stretched relatively slow. It's like a nylon tubular webbing. And if you see now what is happening between 2.5 kilonewton. So here these dots are like 1 kilonewton, 2, 3, 4. Between 2.5 kilonewton and let's say 5 kilonewton. If you make the calculation, you would say, okay, this webbing should stretch from 8.5% to 15.5. So roughly 7% of stretch should be there, if I calculated correctly, yes. So 7% of stretch should be happening if you if you tension it from 2.5 to 5 kilonewton. But this is like, in this case, it's done relatively slow, so you get like a lot of stretch. When I repeated with the same webbing and did the test, like stretching out quite fast, so I was settling it up at 2.5 kilonewton the webbing, waited for a bit until everything is settled down, and then I was like pulling relatively fast in like roughly 1 second to 5 kilonewton, so just having a pulley system and doing one hard pull on it, and measured then the elongation, I got like an increase of only 2.2% of stretch. So it's like roughly 1/3 what we would expect from this curve. And that's pretty interesting because often if you want to calculate the forces which are going on doing leash falls, you use this percentage of stretch. So you expect, okay, in the leash fall you get great forces of 5 kilonewton. So you stretch from 2.5 to 5 kilonewton. If you make the math and you say, okay, the webbing is stretching 7%, which I get out of the graph, you can calculate the forces which are going on in the line, roughly. But as you can see, leashfall is not super slow. It's like within 1 or 2 seconds, the line is loaded. And then you need to get this other value, which I measured at 2.2% stretch. And you get like would get a huge difference in forces on your leash and on your body. And that's, I think, pretty important to know. And that's why we need their better values. The same thing is true for bouncing on a line. If you bounce on a line, you have great similar forces than a leash fall. And that's really important how much you actually effectively stretch out the webbing in this time of the bounce. So often the bounce is taking like 3 seconds for a whole cycle. So from the bottom till the bottom, it's 3 seconds. And that's would be really interesting to measure webbing, how much is it stretching out like this, and not having just the stretch value that we have right now with 18% at 10 kilonewton or whatever we have there, because that you cannot really calculate back, and it's really hard to compare. Even a lot of manufacturers say themselves like these stretch values which you get, you cannot really compare webbings with each other. You get a rough indication. If a webbing has 18% stretch, it's most likely feels more bouncy than a webbing which has 10% stretch. But in the end, if there's like the one manufacturer say 16, the other on 18, you really need to feel the webbing to see what's going on. But me as an engineer, I have the approach, we should somehow measure it, because if you can feel it on the line, that it feels differently, you certainly can measure it. It's just, you need some creativity to figure it out. And then I have like another picture here of a graph, which I got from the website from Panos, who did like some time ago. It's already, I think, 3-4 years ago that he was doing quite a lot of math and really following up on the viscoelasticity effect in slacklines. And what you can see here is basically one single leash fall on a nylon webbing. So you have a nylon webbing, which you again have like the tension and the elongation charts switched over from what you have previously. So that's how you can see it's like a scientific work. And what you can see here, the curve is relatively flat, so it's like really stretchy webbing. So at 4 kilonewton, you have already like 9% stretch or so. The black line is like what he measured himself, and the dotted line is what the manufacturer was stating, which is basically relatively small, similar, but not exactly the same. And then what happened, he had like here a base tension of 2.5 to 3 kilonewton, and he dropped like a heavy weight into it. I think 75 kilograms, 1 meter free fall, whatever. So it's like roughly leash fall. It's a pretty hard leash fall, so you get like peak forces of 7 kilonewton. The blue and the white lines are just different weights, which for this moment doesn't matter too much. It's the base takeaway is like the same. You drop a webbing and you get quite high. And there you see clearly here, you have like a difference between like the black line. When you stretch out the webbing slowly to 7 kilonewton, you expect to have like 13% stretch. If you stretch it out now, the blue line, the beginning is like exactly the same. You stretch the webbing to 7 kilonewton, what you would get here is only a bit more than 8% stretch. So big difference. And that's like just the matter of how fast do you stretch out a webbing. If you stretch it out really fast, you get like a steep line here. If you stretch it out slowly, it's going all the way out here. And this also shows like really beautiful how we cannot really rely on the values which the manufacturers give us at the moment, because this blue and red line, this is like really, if you get these values, we know how the webbing is behaving, doing leash fall and doing bouncing. And these values we can compare to other webbings. The black line is just something which is after all the dampening happening, all the viscoelastic effect going on. And this is like then really hard to compare and actually get the conclusion how will the webbing behave during bouncing. So my proposal is like we need this curve here, especially the steepness of the line, to know and understand how much is our webbing stretching. And so back like which values are interesting for us slackliners. So right now we just have like this one value which we get from the manufacturers, these 10% at 10 kilonewton, 5% at 10 kilonewton, or 18% at 10 kilonewton. That's one value, and we guess then how is our webbing behaving. So the first value which I would like to have and which I would like to see is how much is a webbing stretching while bouncing or in a leash fall. So exactly what I've been talking about. You have a base tension of 2 kilonewton, 2.5 of loading within 3 seconds. So going up to 4 or 5 kilonewton within 1.5 seconds and dropping back down again to 2.5 kilonewton in 1.5 seconds, and then measuring this extension. And if you get like this extension, you actually understand like how is the webbing behaving while bouncing or leash fall. So just having it relatively fast happening. And then the second value, which I think is interesting for us, safety related, is like the stretch during a backup fall. Because this is like also like there are backup fall calculators. Panos did one, which is really nice. But the problem is always like what stretch value do you enter in it? Because in the end, also backup fall is happening quite fast. So depending on how long your line is and how stretchy your webbing is, you get the maximum peak loads within like 1 to 3 seconds. Sometimes maybe even faster that you get. So it's like pretty much shock loading the webbing and not stretching out slowly. And therefore, it would be interesting to really know having a webbing totally relaxed at 0 kilonewton and then pulling it within like 1 second to 5 or 6 kilonewton and really measuring how much is it stretching out. So how much is the webbing able to absorb your fall and to stretch out to absorb energy that not your body is needing to take to absorb all the energy. Because at one point, if your body is absorbing too much energy, it will just break apart. And then the last value is basically, which we have already, is like how much has a webbing stretch. And this is kind of important. I mean, not a lot of people need it really. It's like would be in the old days, when you rigged like your long line with a pulley system, you needed to know how long is your pulley system needs to be that you can rig your line. And therefore this value was great. So you know, okay, I rig like this 100 meter line and I need to go up to 8 kilonewton for this line, and I know, okay, I have this much stretch at 8 kilonewton, so I need to add that much pulley system, and I will get there that my pulley system in the end is not 5 meter long or is like not too short that I'm not able to rig it. And this value is not so important anymore, but it's still quite interesting to know, because in the end, the more stretchy it is, the more energy you want to put in it, and ideally you want to have it like low stretch if you want to rig high tension lines, that you don't need to put too much work into it. So my proposal is how to measure these things. First of all, we need to agree on a range. What is our standard? How do we want to measure it? And therefore, it's worth looking a bit on data, real life data, what is happening actually while bouncing. And here I found a graph online of like when a person was bouncing on the line. So you have like here a base tension of slightly below 2 kilonewton. When the person is standing on the line, walking on the line, it's like 2.5 kilonewton. And then you see here the biggest spikes, which are here, in this case, they are like some back bounces, so normal freestyling. Some of them are like a bit bigger. That's possibly like a rocket mount or so. And the hardest one, I think, it was trying to leash fall it as hard as possible. And you see here the range is below 1.8 up to 4.5 kilonewton. That said, like this person was quite light. It's 57 kilograms only. So heavier persons can, I think, easily go over 5 kilonewton in a normal freestyle session. So I guess having a range, testing your webbing between 2 and 5 kilonewton, understanding how much is it stretching out between these two values, that's, I think, a quite good approximation. And I think in the end, if you measure between 2 and 4.5 or 2 and 5, the value won't change much. And it's like really still quite good to compare different webbings with each other. Here are some more examples, how it looks like. So the weight of the slackliner was always 57 kilograms, so rather light. So, and the standing tension was also here in the first 1.5 kilonewton, 1.4 kilonewton. That has been a few years ago, and in the meantime, I think freestyle high lines have like more tension. I think they're more around 2 kilonewton in the meantime. So forces might be higher. So I assume really much 2 to 5 kilonewton is the standard range, which can go up to 6 kilonewton if you leash fall hard. That's really realistic. And then the next value, which is interesting to read out of here, is the bouncing speed. So how fast is it? And this is like here the 0.35 hertz. That's pretty much like 3 seconds for a full cycle of bounce. That's, for my experience, like pretty well transfers to all freestyle highlines. With higher tension, they might be a bit faster, and if they're shorter, it's a bit faster. But generally, I think one cycle is lasting between 2 and 3 seconds, definitely. Yeah, I think this is like my last slide. So this is like basically the values which are interesting to know, and therefore I would propose setting up a test method which looks like that you put in your webbing, you do like 2 markers on the webbing, can be like just like some some color, the pen marking 2 points on it, having some paper behind it with a scale, so millimeter scale behind it, and then you cycle your webbing. And in the beginning, you need to settle it down because, as you know, like in the beginning, you have like a lot of stretch and a lot of weird things are happening and stretching out over time. So to simulate like the first 2 to 3 sessions, which are like always like changing all the time, you just cyclic load your webbing like 100, 200, 300 times between this 2 and 4 or 5 kilonewton. And then you start measuring, and then you'll start measuring like between 2 and 5 kilonewton with like 1 cycle lasting 3 seconds. You do this a few times and really compare that the curve is always looking exactly the same. So you should end up, depending how you record it, with like a curve like this, looking like this. So it's going always up and you're going always down. If you record this curve and you have like then the force, which will be here in the lower corner, 2 kilonewton up to 5 kilonewton, and then you will measure on this side like the extension, and you have like the path going up and down, and then you get like a lot of interesting information out of this. First of all, the extension, which is really interesting. This can be then transferred to percentage. So if your sample was like 1 meter long and it stretches out like doing this like by 3 centimeter, you know, like you have like 3% stretch between 2 and 5 kilonewton. And this is like really what you feel on the line. And if you have these 3%, you can compare this to another webbing, which maybe has 2% or 1.5% or 2.5%. And if the manufacturers are giving you this value, you have like a really well understanding how the line will behave while bouncing. And this is like the first thing, like this percentage value. But then what Lorenzo was talking about, the dampening, you actually can see if you have this curve with the blue and the red line, so going up the tension and going down the tension. If you have like this picture of it, you can actually like see how much area is between these 2 curves, and therefore you can estimate like how much is the dampening effect, so how much loss is happening when bouncing. And I think that can be pretty interesting to just see this, and then you maybe can also measure this like graphically and measure the area and give it like a number. But overall, I think if there was the possibility to look at these curves, you might get a better understanding of how your webbing behaves before you buy it, and you know exactly. Maybe if we start having these curves, we can see, okay, this webbing is having a lot of losses, so it might be quite easy to walk because it's like feels like just absorbing everything. And other webbings, this area is relatively small, but you know, okay, if I start bouncing, the bounce will go on and I don't need to push much into it. So that could be quite interesting. And I think it's also like not too hard to do. You just need a camera, filming like a webbing, how much is stretching out. You need a load cell over time, getting like the chart out of it, and then just matching it up and measuring it. And then the same thing is like for backup falls, having just a webbing relaxed, doing 2 marks on it, and then relatively fast loading it. That might be technologically difficult to really stretch your webbing from 0 to 5 kilonewton within 1 second. But that's, I don't know exactly which brake test machines are out there, which they can, if something can do this. Otherwise, you might need to come up with like a pulley system and just like really jumping in on the rope and pulling it really fast. That's like a bit of then the technical solution is needed to measure this, but that I think would be quite interesting to understand which forces are up here doing backup falls. So I think that was from my side. I hope you understand more or less what I talked about, and I think if you have any questions, let me know.
Thanks, Yoshi. We have two raised hands. First was Stefan from Red Slacklines, and then Jan also raised his hand.
Okay.
Yes, for the safety, what you said, as I see the stretch curves which we have now, which you showed, are just like extreme values, because on a leash fall, on a bounce, it's always less extension. The force increases more, but we have measures of the force. So in my opinion, we have extreme values of the stretch. So for in safety case, it's just like, oh, it's nice. We have more space between the ground and the line, and which means, okay, in my opinion, it would be nice to compare the webbings. We say, okay, with this speed you test. So if everyone tests with the same speed, we know, okay, the curves can be compared. This I totally understand, but to know about the bounce is just nice if you say, okay, I want to be exactly 50 centimeters above the ground in a bounce. But the longer the line, the lower the force increases, because you have longer bounces and all this. I'm not sure if it's really necessary to have exactly the extension on this speed of getting the force in the slackline, because as I see, it's every time a smaller expansion, and that's nice for the safety because you are more above the ground, as I see. Or what do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, yes, we need to have it's better to work with conservative values and say, okay, we calculate with higher stretch values to be sure to stay above the ground. But at the moment, it's really hard to say exactly how this is going and what's happening. And in the end, I would say better have precise values, and you get keep yourself a safety margin before taking some values and you have no idea. In the end, I think not a lot of people are actually starting calculating the height and the backup length. I think most people don't think at all about this. And if people think about it, then most people just test it themselves. And that gives you a relatively nice estimation. And in the end, I always prefer having precise values and then adding a safety margin, how much you want on top of that.
Yes. For me, it would be interesting to say, is this the extreme, the conservative value that is measured now? Is it really like this, that the faster you put attention on it, the less extension you have? If it's like this, then we know, okay, if we test with the lower speed than it actually happens, it will be a conservative value, and that would be the aim. If it's like this, or do I understand it wrong?
And there are different things. I mean, the question is, what is conservative? For hitting the ground, yes, we have conservative values, but for having forces doing the backup fall on your body, so if height is not a problem, we don't have conservative values. We have now the overestimating the stretch. So if you make the calculation, you will see, okay, that should be totally fine on the body. It's just 2.5 kilonewton on your body, so that's fine. But if you actually have real life values, then maybe the forces are much higher because it's actually not as stretchy. But from the stuff which I learned from backup falls, actually there are a few effects against each other, so that's hard to say. So if you're normally, most calculations have to be done with a value at 10% and at 10 kilonewton. So you have your 12% at 10 kilonewton or whatever, for example, and then you extrapolate and saying, okay, the stretch curve is a straight line which is independent of speed and everything. That's how you make the calculation. That's just simplifying it a lot. And this is actually for backup falls, from what I did the testing 3 years ago, just pulling relatively fast, that was actually relatively close to it, because in the beginning, apparently webbing is stretching out quite a bit more than you would expect from these graphs. And then it's later on recovering, it's the opposite. But yeah, for the bouncing and leash falls, there's definitely a big difference. There you can definitely see a really big difference if you pull it slowly, or if you have a line pre-tension to 2.5 kilonewton and then pull it to 5 kilonewton. There is really a big difference what the stretch values give us and what it's actually how it behaves. So
Thank
Stefan,
you.
do you know? No?
Maybe when you leave the call and come back in.
Good.
Any other questions for Yoshi or Lorenzo?
Yeah, I had some question a bit higher in the chat about the creep, because it's something we don't have information in polyester and polyamide and other, because it's really something that it's important in Dyneema. Maybe you already heard about it in Dyneema, because it's really important. It's because there is no stretch, so it's a higher percentage of difference between with the creep than with the elastic extension. So it's important for everything in Dyneema, mainly the splices and other. But I don't know if it makes also a difference in polyester and polyamide, and because if you have your viscoelastic, your or you say in English again, it's it's your graphic going up and down. I don't know, don't remember in English. But it's it doesn't come back to the exact value. In fact, mainly at the beginning and after. Normally, you need to reach higher value to have a difference to because of the creep of the fibers.
Yeah, I have not super much experience with the creep of slack lines, but yeah, I mean, it can be, you can, I guess, like mix them up with the viscoelastic effect. It's just, with the viscoelastic effect is normally reversible. So if you stretch it out and wait for some time, it like stretches, gets longer and longer and longer until it's like hitting a limit at one point. And then if you detension it, it's going back to the initial length again, like after some time. The creep, as far as I understand, it's like the webbing is afterwards longer, and it's never going back to the same length again, as far as I know. If this is not happening, I have not much experience with Dyneema webbing and how this is going. If it's over time going back again to the same length, then I would not call it creep, then I would call it really the viscoelastic effect, what was happening there. And I don't know, it's like creep can be sometimes also infinity long, so it's always continuous. It never stops, this effect. In some ways, in some materials, just the longer you hold it, at one point it's just creeping out longer and longer and longer and longer, and this effect never stops. And the viscoelastic effect is definitely stopping at one point, and then it might be continuing to actually like transfer then to being creep. But with creep I don't have much experience.
Yeah, in fact, in Dyneema it's because it's important about the creep because it's higher and higher, and after it, the fibers just break. It makes the fibers just break. So it's like, in fact, that's why I also talked about that a bit earlier with the fatigue. It's kind of related to the fatigue in the fibers. And it goes together, at the same time with the viscoelastic effect. Because some part come back to the initial point, but you still have some kind of fatigue in the fibers. So, and this kind of fatigue doesn't come back to the initial point. So that's why it makes it a bit more complex. And I don't know if it's really matter in if you talk about polyamide mainly, because it's like so elastic, then maybe some creep in those fibers are really like under 1% of difference, or like really, really under 1% of difference. So it doesn't matter. with the elasticity, I mean.
Yeah, I think that's like then a difficult topic. What's exactly going on? Which material has like more creep and less, and so on? I don't know. Therefore, we would need to measure our webbings precisely, and I guess that's quite hard because everyone is measuring the webbings slightly different, and therefore you cannot say you order like 100 meter of webbing and 2 years later you measure it again and you get like 103 meter. That's good possible that it was from the beginning on 103 meter long. That's therefore we would need to have like a much more precise measuring method for webbing. And then we could see if our webbing has creep, or nylon webbing as well, or if it doesn't have creep. But I think now, Stefan, we can see if you can talk now. Yes, perfect.
Yay! Thanks, Yoshi, for the talk. I think there were many interesting suggestions that we all would love to see. The problems I see with it is a kind of standardization of the testing. If you look at the testing machines that are available now, I think none of the machines I've ever stood in front of was quick enough in the pulling to make such a test in a realistic way for a backup fall or for bouncers. If you test like 50 centimeters of a tubular nylon webbing, it takes about 20 seconds to stretch it to breaking. So, and this is in a really fast configuration of these machines. So I think to have this tested in a standardized way, we would have to find a way to make this somehow independent from the regular machines that are used right now. But I think the approach of using a pulley system, like jumping into it, like you suggested, would be a not standardized way, because I think if Sam jumps into a pulley system, or you jump into a pulley system, or me jump into a pulley system, it's like completely different speed, weight, whatever. So this would not be even close to being a standardized way of measuring such an effect. So do we have any ideas how to solve, how to create a standard for measuring such an effect?
Yeah, so that's actually like one of the hard point is really the backup falls. And I would say like a machine which can do like a full cycle in 3 seconds, between 2 and 5 kilonewton. I think that's possible. At least I saw this at Siebert. We did like the test. I think we was cyclic loading it with 1 hertz between 2 and 7 kilonewton, our web logs.
In what kind of webbing?
It was web logs, and I don't know how long the webbing was in between, but...
Question is what kind of webbing? I think it's possible to measure this in a polyester webbing, like you have a 3 or 4 ton webbing. It's easily possible in 1 hertz to go from 2 to 5 kilonewtons. I agree. The problem I see is with tubular nylons or any kind of nylon webbing, you will probably not be able to get the machines to this kind of speed where you can measure in 1 hertz from 2 to 5 or 2 to 7 or whatever kind of kilonewtons.
We can do it simpler. Maybe we don't need a machine. Maybe we can just hang it from the ceiling, or attach a simple static pulley system or something. So maybe thinking of something that is not a machine that can still be standardized. A simple setup like Yoshi did in my garden once with just a pulley system. I think it can actually be measured simpler than on a machine.
I mean, so yeah, the thing is like, then of course it's not exactly the same always, but if you record everything what you're doing, and that's basically what you're doing with a load cell, so you need to get the graph out, so not only max and min values, you need to have the whole graph. Out of the graph you will see what was your frequency which you cycle loaded. So is it like 2 hertz, 3 hertz, 4 hertz? That's what you can read out afterwards. And you also see like what are the peak forces, and then you just have like your video with it, and therefore you just need to find then a method how to match up like the two devices with each other. I guess it's like possible to do this like electronically directly. Otherwise, you can also do it manually if you just like make like one cycle much slower, and then you know exactly, okay, here I start really like the testing that's like then important, and that's how you can synchronize it. And then you just have like basically a guideline in which range it does need to be. So we can define, okay, it needs to be between 2 and 3 hertz, and then you need to be good enough to actually hit this exactly. And if you're out of this range, you just need to repeat the test until you are like within this range, and then you can do the tests. And then there's the question like, how precisely do you get always up to the 5 kilonewton? That can be then a bit more tricky. When I was doing the tests, I just had I had a pulley system without any brake in it and was redirecting it to the ceiling and then downwards. And I had like a rope clamp, a sender, which was like then getting jammed into the pulley at the top, basically. So I was hanging there and I was like knowing, okay, if it's at the top, I'm like at 2 kilonewton roughly. And then I could always like pull it down and let go to the bottom again. And then when I pull precisely enough, I was always like hitting plus minus half a kilonewton. I was hitting these 5 kilonewton. So it was between 4.5 and 5.5. And in the end, you just need to hit like then a few cycles precisely at 5 kilonewton. You do this test like you do like 20 cycles, and then you search out like these cycles which were like precisely between 2 and 5 and take there the value. Or otherwise you scale it down. I mean, you don't need to have like 3% between 2 and 5 kilonewton. You can also say you calculate it down and say, okay, if it was between 2 and 5 kilonewton, 3% stretch, it transfers to 1% per kilonewton. And then you are independent of how high you went exactly. Then you can also have a range again and say, okay, as long as you're between 4 and 5 and 5.5 at the peak, you can just like compare the bottom to the top, have the difference in kilonewton there, the difference in stretch there, and then you get like percentage per kilonewton of stretch value for this range, which I guess we all agree on this more or less, that the most interesting part for us is like between 2 and 5 kilonewton, because that's what you're trick bouncing on. That's why your leash falls are happening normally. And if you're walking a normal high line, polyester high line, then you don't care too much about the values. Maybe short beginner lines, that it would be worth maybe looking into it again. But I think often also your standing tension on a polyester, you're not often using polyester lines on 30-meter beginner lines. So often you will have there also standing tension of 2 kilonewton and your leash falls will go up to 5 kilonewton on beginner lines. I guess there more data, more measurement points would be interesting to see, measuring all kind of high lines, what forces appear, but I'm pretty sure with 2 to 5 kilonewton we have like a pretty good average for all kind of lines and getting a quite good understanding. And then for the backup test, just like for how to test this, then that's like really the tricky part, because you potentially need to go really up to 5 kilonewton quite fast. And that's good possible that like really practice machines are not able to do this. And that is like a generally problem for us, because drop tests are, in my opinion, not good enough for this. So if you do drop tests, they are too fast. You're shock loading it too high. So that's also not good. So we need to find a method how to load our systems. Doesn't matter what we're testing. If you're testing web locks, if you're testing knots, if you're testing webbing, that's all. I mean, backup knots is still a really big topic. How to measure this exactly? What knots are the best one? And if you're doing slow tests, they maybe don't match up at all what is happening in real life in highlines. And drop tests are also too fast again. So we need to find a system how to measure it fast, but not too fast. And that's like at the moment, I think, a tricky part, and I'm not sure how this could work out. But having like weight dropping into something, but in a controlled way. So if you have like pulley system with like 100 kilogram weight and you just like guide it down, so you're not letting it fall. I mean, even if you have like a 5-to-1 pulley system and you have like a heavy weight hanging into it and you let it fall, it's still much slower than a fall tower test. So you might be able to get actually like the speeds, and this is then a bit of testing to really get a good range of speed. So within half a second or 1 second loading, you are webbing to 5-6 kilonewton.
The other issue that I still see is, as far as I know, not all manufacturers of slackline webbings right now are even capable of producing the regular kind of stretch chart that you produced, that you showed in the beginning. So I'm kind of curious, if we as community don't even make it to have all the manufacturers producing these kind of simple charts, how do we want to convince all the manufacturers to go the even further way to make it even more complicated for them? So do you think this is a realistic approach to go with more effort, where we see even the small effort is not even taken yet?
I totally agree. There's like a difficult topic. I mean, I know Walter Siebert most likely would be able to do these tests, but then they're costing again. I mean, if you're thinking about like getting it ISA certified, your webbings, we might be able to change the standard, or like the safety commission might be able to change the standard there and get including these tests if the desire is there. And then it's like, but the test will be more expensive then. So the question is like, will manufacturers be willing to pay it? as we can see, most webbings are not certified because manufacturers say it's not worth for them to certify their webbing, apparently.
I think the question is not if the manufacturers are willing to pay it. I think the question is if the community is willing to pay what the manufacturers paid beforehand. So
yeah,
this is what we are talking about.
Yeah, that's the general question. Yeah, of course. Yeah, in the end, it's a tricky point. I mean, it's then the point of like just having volunteers, whoever is interested. If you set up like your machine, taking a few webbings and testing them, publishing it, like not from the manufacturing side, could be one thing. It's a bit tricky, but in the end, I mean, if you get like these graphs out there and you document them correctly, you don't need to know if they have done be professional, because all the data which you get there is showing it. If you have like the video done, how fast it's being stretched and so on, and how this tensioning and detensioning curve looks like, you can get all the information out of there. And this is like not, you don't need to trust the person doing too much these things. Of course, you need to know it was the webbing actually, not mixing up any graphs, but in the end, yeah, it's like more curiosity. You need to know what's going on, and then you can repeat these tests. If you don't trust the manufacturer, you can set up it at home. Hopefully, line scale 3s are coming out quite soon, so a lot of slackliners will have like a line scale, and that's basically all you need to do: a camera, a line scale, and you can with the pulley system you can repeat these tests by yourself. Yeah.